The following interview does not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of KGPR Montana Public Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Mark Mathison, and my guest is Lita Pepion. So she is from Billings, and right now she is running for the Yellowstone County Justice of the Peace. But she is also an activist on prison reform. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the problems that for-profit prisons are giving our country and our people, how it's affecting us. So welcome, Lita.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you for stopping in. So tell us, how did you get interested in running for the Yellowstone Justice of the Peace?
Well, I had been thinking about it for quite a while, have always been interested in law and, of course, justice as an activist, always working toward social, racial, and economic justice, and believe that if I can work inside the system, that I can have some positive influences for change, for the better, that will improve things for all Yellowstone County residents, that will curb crime, but not in a manner that hurts people and families, and
right.
that is not so costly to the state as far as incarceration and that type of thing.
Now, you also recently took a trip to Seattle. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yes, that was great. That was a great trip. A group of about 21 indigenous people from throughout the United States were invited by the Alliance for a Just Society in Seattle to attend an advanced Native organizers training. So there were people from all over the U.S., Alaska, everybody fighting for some type of social or mostly environmental justice, a lot of issues with coal and drilling and destroying the environment in a number of ways to profit. So there was a lot of people that worked for environmental justice. But we spent 5 days learning how to get our reform efforts organized and be more effective. And we also participated in a couple of actions. The first one was at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill and Melinda Gates gave the prison for-profit industry almost $5 million very recently.
Wow.
$2.2 million for adult detention centers and $2.5 million for youth detention centers. And anybody who's been following me knows that I'm very opposed to putting people in cages. I think there are better ways to handle them. In addition, we have a lot of mentally ill people, et cetera, that are being treated inhumanely. But that's a later story. So we gathered with some other organizing groups from Seattle. There were several represented. I don't recall all of the names at the moment. And had a rally outside of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so all of the participants of the training participated in one way or another, just as we were taught in the training. Everybody had a role. We had somebody kind of the stage manager, and we had drummers and the camera people. And so everybody got to learn hands-on as well. And I got to be the speaker, which was fun. And so we held that rally there for, just about an hour one day. And then a couple of the security guards, I was kind of amazed that there were so many big burly security guards standing around. I don't know if that was for us or if that's all the time. But there was some big, football player looking guys, huge guys, and they were standing there keeping a pretty close eye on us throughout the rally. But then a couple of other gentlemen came out and said they were willing to talk with us and find out what we were there for. And initially they just wanted one person, but we convinced them to let 6 individuals in to talk with them. And unfortunately, I wasn't one of them, so I'm not sure exactly what happened in that meeting, but I do know that several big companies have divested money from the prison for profit industry. So I hope our efforts were in some way effective and influential on that decision, and that they will divest.
Okay.
And the second action, the group of organizers, and again, we worked with several groups from Seattle, mostly grassroots organizing groups fighting for social, racial, and economic justice, and of course, and always environmental justice as well. But we met several of them at the United States Department of Homeland Security and had a peaceful round dance. And then again, we spoke, told them why we were there, and we were there to stand in solidarity with the 34,000 immigrants who are in cages in and around the Seattle, Washington area in prisons for profit, for no other reason than the color of their skin or a border that to indigenous people has never existed. We always migrated. And so there's this imaginary border, and apparently they're on the wrong side of it. So they get to stay in cages, and their families get to suffer the consequences, which are tremendous consequences.
Yeah. Well, let's get down to the nitty-gritty then, the problems of for-profit prisons. Now, I just came across an article, and I'd like to read a quote I pulled from it. It says, "When prisoners are held for profit rather than the ends of justice, they are not always treated with dignity." I thought that was a very powerful statement. Can you elaborate a little bit about your impression of...
As far as the treatment of
Yeah.
prisoners in the prisons for profit? Well, you've surely opened a can of worms there.
Yeah.
As you know, any kind of quality food, healthcare services, counseling, mental health services, any of that stuff would cut into the profit of a for-profit corporation. And most of the time, the corporations don't like that. And so most prisons for profit are run on a shoestring.
Yeah. And for our listeners who are not aware of it, we do have a prison for profit in Montana. It's the prison up in Shelby.
Yes, Crossroads. And in fact, I'm on my way up there right now to visit my son. And that's another horrible impact of prisons for profit, is the impact on families.
Right. So how does let's break away to that point. How does prisons for profit, their policies detrimentally affect the family?
Oh, so many ways. Their policies are oppressive in almost every way, shape, or form. It takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to even get approved to visit your family member. More often than not, the application comes back with something they found wrong or something, and so you might even do the application 3 or 4 times before it goes through. So right off the bat, you can't even get in to see them. Because the prison for profit doesn't feed them very well. Definitely, I would venture to guess many are malnourished if anyone were to check. So sending them money so that they can eat well, and so that they can participate in a craft or something, so they're not just sitting there staring at concrete walls all day. The cost to travel to visit is very high, depending, again, on how close they are to where you live. But, for instance, a trip for our family to go see my son is probably about $300 to $400 every time we go. So, obviously, that doesn't happen very often.
For communication outside of visiting, emails, telephone calls?
Telephone calls. And
no email?
No email. I did have a relative who was in there years ago who was able to email. I'm not sure what the requirements are to be able to do that. So some inmates there do have the ability to email, but my son doesn't. So he calls, and you have to prepay. Again, there's just a few companies that provide that service for telephone calls in the prison, and quite expensive, $15 for about a 15-minute call, and then a charge, of course, every time you call. I mean, every time you put money on their telephone. So say you put $100 on so that they can call, then their fee is right around $20.
Okay, so if a family is poor to begin with, it could really affect the relationship that a father or a mother has with their children on the outside.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. Often people lose contact, or they only have contact through mail if they're even able to afford stamps. And so children lose touch with their parents. And there are feelings going on with that as well. So maybe they think their parent doesn't care about them when that's not the case. They just don't have money.
Yeah. Now, I've done a lot of research on the for-profit prisons as well, and I mean, there's a lot of articles out there that are against them and speak out against them in many ways. But I also came across a company report from the Corrections Corporation of America, which owns Crossroads up in Shelby. And here's two things I pulled from it. You know, they're trying to attract investors, and point one, attractive dividend. So apparently crime does pay if you're an investor.
Yes.
But here's the one that scared me. Significant growth and value creation potential.
Exactly. So where are they getting this growth?
Yeah.
Are people going to be breaking more laws, or are the laws going to be tougher, or are, as I see what's happening now, is people are being sent to prison more and more when that is not necessary. They could do some other type of program, or so many need to be maybe in some kind of mental health facility instead of in a cage.
So who pays the prisons to hold the prisoners?
The taxpayers. Montana's taxpayers are paying for this one.
So where's the outcry from the taxpayers?
I wonder that every day.
I hear conservative talking points and political campaigns where they're about fiscal responsibility and saving money, saving taxpayer money, and yet this is doing just the opposite. Where is the outrage?
Yes, I do wonder, where is the outrage? Why are people not furious that we're, we call this the Department of Corrections, and they're correcting nobody. They are keeping people in cages. My son has been in there for 2 years and has done nothing but sleep.
I also ran across an interesting article regarding, forgive me, I don't have his name, Bernard Kirk. He was came into the limelight during 9/11 terrorist attacks. He was the commissioner of police in New York City, and he recently got into trouble himself and is now behind bars. And he has a totally different view of prisons now that he's behind the bars. And it's not because he's feeling sorry for himself, but he's seeing the reality of what he has sentenced or, put so many other people through. It's, what is wrong with our country? We're supposed to be getting better in the treatment of people, the treatment of mentally ill, the treatment of the poor, the treatment of minorities. And yet prison reform is kind of going backward.
It is, and it is terrifying. It is terrifying what they're doing to people and getting away with in the name of the law. I mean, I would think that some of those things that they do to people would be illegal. But nobody seems to care. Yeah. And the quotes you got from the Corrections Corporation of America's annual report straightforward tell us that they're planning to grow this industry. Yeah. Whose kids are they going to take next?
Yeah. Well, there's a very strong and powerful lobbying from the for-profit prisons with every state and the federal level. So they're out there, trying to convince these legislators to make these laws tougher so that they can have more inmates. And it goes back to more taxpayer money is being spent, and why?
More taxpayer money going to torture people, spent to torture people and hurt families and hurt communities.
That's right.
And why is I wonder that often. And speaking of them lobbying, and I think it was in 2012, Corrections Corporation of America spent $17.5 million lobbying for tougher laws in D.C., in addition to the millions they spent lobbying in states. I believe they're pretty politically active in the state of Montana as well, although I have not had time to research who all they have contributed to. I've heard rumors, but of course we won't discuss those. We don't gossip.
Yeah. Well, there's a pretty interesting website, it's Follow the Money, and you can track where money is going to the various political individuals in every state.
Yes.
And you can find out, it's quite interesting who is contributing the money. And like you said, some of it is coming from the political or the for-profit prisons.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's look at it from another angle. I mean, little bitty Shelby, the community up there, Cut Bank, their income potentials are pretty limited.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with building a facility up there to boost their economy?
Exactly.
That provides a lot of jobs, doesn't it?
It does. And people think that because we're working on prison reform, we're talking about putting hundreds of people or thousands of people out of jobs, and we're not. There are many better things we could do with that money that would be way more effective, that would build people instead of destroy them.
Yeah. That's a pretty lousy way to make a living, in my opinion.
I know several people who have worked there because I grew up in Browning. I've got family up there, and they didn't stick it out very long. They said they couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, for anybody who studied history long enough, you realize that whenever profit is the motive, a lot of sins can be committed.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And
what amazes me is how hard they work to cover those up, and how they ignore the plight of families.
Yeah. So in your position, the information that you've uncovered, let's talk a little bit about that potential prison down in Harding. Have you heard anything more about what's going on there?
Last I heard, they were calling it a treatment program. I mean, they built it as a prison, but the last I heard, and I believe there was an article in the Gazette not too long ago, that they were talking about opening up a treatment program there. And I know they had a job fair out there because, again, that's another place where there's a high unemployment rate. People need jobs.
Yeah.
But and I understand that. I fully understand that. We all need jobs, but we could do better. We could do so much better.
Yeah. Well, we could create jobs building concentration camps.
Heaven forbid.
They did that in Germany. They had a terrible economy, and they created a lot of jobs.
Well, that's just about what this is. If anybody wanted to go inside and take a look, I mean, that's just about how this is.
Yeah.
It's not quite as horrid, but it's horrid.
Yeah. So what other insights can you give us about the problems with for-profit prisons?
Well, the biggest problem, as I see it, is they're taking from the poorest and most vulnerable people in the country. That's the biggest problem because of the cost of your loss of a family member. And to me, it almost seems like they're creating another generation of inmates by doing that, by taking parents from children.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. Of course, the financial impact. And it's not just the impact on states. It's the impact, on families. It's the impact on states. It's the impact on the taxpayers. It's huge. I mean, it's gotten ridiculously expensive to incarcerate a person for a year. I'm not sure what they're quoting now, but I think I heard on the radio the other day that it costs $100,000 a year to incarcerate one youth. And
that's a lot more than it takes to educate them in school.
How many families could we support with that? Yeah, how many more schools could we build? We could create alternative schools. There are so many other ways, and nobody would have to lose jobs. Other insights, though, the health care is probably worse than any other. I think it's funded at a higher level, or so I've heard, and so people think that prisoners get better health care than the average American, but again, I challenge anyone to go to prison and try to get some kind of health care. Um, we have so many anti-bullying initiatives, but yet that system seems to encourage bullying. Um, Other things, it's hurting communities again by so many single parents, and of course with the economy. So parents are working, 10, 15, 20 hours a day, and then trying to parent as well. And when one of them is gone, just think of the impact. They don't have time to parent. So again, that next generation of inmates, the impact on health, because eventually these men and women are going to get out of prison. And if their health is poor from while they were in there, it's going to cost again, because they don't have decent jobs, they don't have insurance, they're basically starting with nothing. So it's going to impact us even when they get out.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of even pre-release centers and parole agencies is pretty extensive as well, and there are ways that we could fix that. So
Yeah.
just so many things. But the biggest thing is that it's just not right to profit off of other people's misery and pain.
Yeah. You know, it's one thing to punish people for what they've done wrong.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I've never ever once said that we should be easier on crime and that we
Yeah.
should let people go out and do whatever they want. No, we can still curb crime. It's just the fashion we're doing it is not helpful to anybody in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And one of the problems I see is our zero tolerance policies. It's especially when it comes down to the school level, it's really creating a pipeline, school to prison,
Yes, it is.
for
Yes,
a
it
lot
is.
of poor students.
It is, and it's frightening. I'm not even sure the numbers of children who are being incarcerated right now, but it's pretty big. I haven't looked at any numbers lately. Maybe you have some insight on that.
Well, I don't have the numbers, but I've read a number of articles over the last several years about the school to prison pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
and how, things that I got away with, mischievous youth,
Yeah,
kids,
mistakes of youth.
kids are going to prison now, or county jail or whatever. And what does that do to their psyche?
Exactly. I mean, they've already probably got some issues from living in poverty and that type of thing, and so it creates more feelings of shame, low self-esteem. So how successful are they going to be when they've been beaten down,
Yeah.
from day one, and then even society does it to them with
Yeah.
taxpayer money, and yeah, what are we building? What kind of people are we building in those places? Not very good.
Yeah. Well, I just wonder if the prisons then become a school in themselves for creating worse criminals.
I believe so. I believe they do. I mean, who else do you have to hang out with 24/7, day after day, for however many years you're in there,
Yeah.
as other criminals? And then it takes a certain degree of, I guess, toughness to just survive in there.
Yeah.
And so even toughness can be a crime when you get out, but
Yeah.
if you stand up for yourself. So yeah, we're creating more people to fill prisons for profit, and that's exactly why that quote is in their report, because that's what they're working toward.
But on the other hand, in my study of history, I know how bad prisons used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Here in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, various places, we have come a long ways in treating the criminal element. But, I mentioned it earlier, it seems like we're going backwards now.
I think we've come a long ways in our treatment of inmates, but I also think that there are more inmates being put away for minor crimes, or as you mentioned, mistakes of youth, being mischievous. It's becoming a point now where some people are being imprisoned simply because they're poor. So say they get pulled over for expired license. They couldn't afford them. Well, then they don't have insurance, and then they have fines, and then they can't pay the fines. So then they get arrested, and then they get more fines, and they can't pay them, and eventually they go to prison.
And that's...
How does that pay back society anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, who can tell me that? How does it pay back society?
Well, in a very large way, that's a throwback to the old debtor prison
It is.
philosophy that we used to have. You know, we were supposed to have come away from that, but we're going back to it.
Yeah.
People are ended up in prison because of debt. When people fall behind in their payments or whatever, creditors are now threatening them. You know, if you don't get this paid, you're going to go to jail.
Yeah.
And they're lobbying for the laws to do that.
Yes, they are.
Well,
And people have got to know about it. It's terrifying to think that you could be sent to jail or to prison because you can't afford to pay your bills when wages haven't gone up in 30 years.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Everything else went up but wages. So
Yeah. Well, we've created quite a dilemma in our country, but it's just amazing. This is 2014, and we have more prisoners now than ever. The U.S. population is a small fraction, 3-4% of the world population, but yet we hold 25% of the prisoners.
yeah,
We are number one in
We
the
are.
world.
we are.
In prison population.
Yes, and
That's
it's very
a-
frightening.
That's a horrible statistic.
It is.
So, you
And
know,
while that was happening, the prison for profit industry made over $3 billion last year in profit.
wow.
3 billion, not million, 3
Yeah.
billion.
Well, crime pays if you're an investor.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
I don't know how they can allow it to happen, but that's the way it seems to be.
So not only are you running for Justice of the Peace, but you're also running a grassroots campaign. What are some of the accomplishments that you've made so far?
Well, we haven't made a whole lot. We have a few little wins here and there. One of the biggest ones, and it wasn't solely our effort, but an effort of a number of people working on prison reform, was the divestment of millions of dollars in the prison for profit industry.
Mm-hmm.
And that just recently happened. And other things, we're working to get the prison here audited, the prison for profit, and the Montana Department of Corrections. We have not made a lot of huge strides in that effort, but we're still plucking along, and we don't plan to ever give up that effort until something is done. We would eventually like to see that business no longer allowed in the state of Montana.
Well, I hope your efforts work out. I would recommend to our listeners a Facebook page called Beyond Bars, and I know you also have a few favorites as well.
Yeah, well, I like Beyond Bars, and if you're interested in the local effort, you could go to the Indian People's Action page. You could also check out the Lita Pepion for Justice of the Peace, Department 1. You got to remember that, Department 1.
Okay.
And also that I'm a write-in, so you have to write my name in. And but you could go to either of those pages as well and find a number of resources to find out more, and also my personal Facebook page, at Lita Pepion on Facebook.
Okay.
Lots of information on what's happening with that.
And just a simple Google search, for our listeners, they can find so much information that is very negative to the prisons for profit. The only thing positive you're going to find is from those that are in the business. And at least that's my experience in searching. So it's something that, we need to think about and fight against.
I agree, and I think Montana's got a good start with that, with forming that Law and Justice Interim Committee to look deeper at the Montana Parole Board. But also, there are some good efforts happening here, and they're happening. It's not a nonpartisan thing. Nobody's fighting with each other. Everybody that's working toward this effort is working together. Democrats, Republicans, people who have been impacted by this horrible, horrible industry.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lita. I appreciate you stopping into the studio. And we have to end the interview now, but we look forward to talking to you again. This is Mark Mathison. Have a good day.